You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the two-time national best-selling author of On Fire and In Awe. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, the host of the Live Inspired podcast, and he's the real-life inspiration behind the major motion picture Soul on Fire. Each week, John interviews extraordinary individuals about their life stories so you can more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. So our guest today's name is Nicholas Epley. And if it's not a name you recognize yet, I think it's a name you're going to remember afterwards. He is a behavioral scientist. He's a best-selling author, and he's a professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. He's also a guy whose groundbreaking research explores why we as human beings often misunderstand one another. From studying social connection and happiness to teaching students how to design a meaningful life, Nicholas has spent his career and really his life helping others better understand themselves and ultimately better understanding those around them. Today, my friend Nicholas joins me to share why we are far more connected than we think, why it's really important to stay connected, why our fears around talking to strangers are almost always wrong, and how one simple conversation can change the course of a day, a week, or are you ready for it? A life. Drawing from research behind his latest book, it's called A Little More Social, we talk about the real cost of isolation, the lessons he's learned through personal loss and fatherhood, and why meaningful connections start when we move past superficial, surface-level small talk and become genuinely concerned, interested, and curious about the person in front of us. You're going to love this conversation. We talk a little bit about everything in this conversation, and it moved me. It's going to move you. So my encouragement, my friends, if you're ready to express a little bit more gratitude or ask some better questions or take some small social risks to lead to deeper joy and stronger relationships, this conversation is for you. Buckle up. Get ready for the ride with my friend, now yours, his name, Nicholas Epley. Nick, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you, John. So delighted to be here today. I'm excited about this.
Well, you told me before I hit record that my friends, John, call me Nick. So I'm no longer going to refer to you as Nicholas because I view you, after reading your book and spending some time with you, as my friend.
Awesome.
And I have a feeling that everyone who hears our conversation will no longer call you Nicholas either. I think they're going to view you not as a researcher or a guy up there, but as someone they wish they could have a coffee with too.
I hope so. I hope so.
So, Nick, when people bump into you at a grocery store or coffee shop or university and they say, what do you do? How do you respond to that?
I usually tell people that I study mind reading for a living. I study how we make inferences about each other's thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes, and mostly how we screw that up and misunderstand each other in all sorts of ways that make our life maybe a little less good than it could be. And for the last decade and a half or so, maybe 2 decades, I've been trying to understand what I think is one particularly problematic mistake, which is underestimating how positively other people will respond to us when we reach out to connect with them.
Gosh, there's so much there. Where are you doing this work currently?
So I'm a professor at the University of Chicago in the Booth School of Business. I actually teach a course here to our MBA students called Designing a Good Life. It's an ethics and happiness course trying to encourage our MBA students to think about how they might design organizations that help folks be better than they might otherwise be in ways that create more sustainable, ethical institutions and organizations, and also in ways that align with feeling good as well. That is being
Mm.
happier in your life as well, not just being ethically good, but also feeling good, being happier. And so that's where we're doing the work here at the University of Chicago. But we run our experiments all over the world.
When you tell folks that class you teach, don't you sometimes almost pinch yourself thinking, I can't believe I get paid
So
to help people live better lives and build more meaningful organizations?
it's a little silly, and occasionally it's good to be reminded of this. I was in New York City last week, and I was about to give a talk at Columbia University in the psych department there. And I love doing this, but at the same time, I was feeling kind of burdened, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got to go give this talk. It's going to be hard to do, talk about this research. And I got onto the elevator, and I had a three-floor conversation with the hotel worker there. I asked him, "How are you today?" And he said, "I'm alive and I'm working. I'm blessed to be here today." And yeah, so sometimes resetting yourself, reminding yourself how blessed I am in this job is great. This is a course that I just made up because I believed that behavioral science has something to teach us
Yeah.
about how to live better lives. And it was not something that was offered in the school. Ethics is usually not taught this way as a behavioral class about why good folks sometimes go off and do less than good things. And so it was an opportunity to be creative and do something that I thought was valuable. And it is a blessing to be able to do that for sure.
Well, I'm gonna have you leave the elevator and also not only leave the elevator, leave the classroom. I'm gonna
Yeah.
back you up a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in rural Iowa out in the country. All my extended family are farmers. In fact, we have a seed corn company in the family in northern Iowa, Epley Hybrids, just in Shell Rock, Iowa. So I grew up out in the woods doing a lot of things outdoors. Up until about 9 years old, my dream job was to be a mountain man. I thought that was a thing. I remember very clearly when I was 9 years old, learning that wasn't a thing and being totally disappointed.
Well, it
Uh,
is a thing, but I'm
I
not sure it's
guess, yeah, it
personally
was.
your thing, Nick.
It like wasn't a legit job. Like I thought it was like a real job. I could be Grizzly Adams. I was disappointed I couldn't be Grizzly Adams. I went through high school. I was an athlete. I played football and basketball. I didn't like high school very well. I was kind of bored. Went to St. Olaf College and mostly to play football for Don Canfield, who
Wow.
was my coach there, who was a super good man, who would have us sit on the 50-yard line every Wednesday of practice, and he would have a conversation with us about how to be a good person, how to be a good man. He died my senior year in college. We lost a good one there. And I was inspired, though, in college to do research, worked really well, worked with some amazing faculty, PhD at Cornell University, working with Tom Gilovich, who was an amazing PhD advisor, first faculty job at Harvard in the psych department, had wonderful colleagues there. And I've been at the University of Chicago for 21 years now, since 2005.
As a wannabe mountain man, as a guy who's bored in high school, yawning in the back row, did you see academia as your path forward in life? Like, was that a vision you had?
Absolutely not. My dad is a PhD. He started out in academia as a psychologist, Wartburg College in Iowa, which is where he got his PhD, and met my mom. They've been married for over 50 years now. And so that was it was a little bit in the ether. My mom's dad, my grandpa was a PhD as well. He was a philosophy professor. That was a little in the ether, but we never talked about it. I never talked about work with my dad. He started a
Yeah.
market research and consulting firm when I was young doing research. But academia was never something I thought about until I got into college and I was in an intro psychology class. I didn't like my biology class, but I was in an intro psych class that allowed me to read the book at whatever pace I wanted to read. It was a self study. And I got through the semester's worth of material in a month.
Mm.
And my professor says to me, "We're in trouble because I was supposed to take until December and we're in the first week of October." Right? In college, doors would open for me and I'd walk through them. And I could push on things and run as fast as I wanted to by something that I was inspired to do. And applied to graduate school, things worked out well, research worked out well. It was never something I planned. They were opportunities that presented themselves that I grabbed.
Mm.
And now I can't imagine doing anything else other than being a scientist. I love what I do.
Did you feel in the early days, whether at Cornell or eventually you ended up at Harvard and now Chicago, that you belonged in the classrooms where you were teaching? Did an
Never.
Iowa farm kid feel as if like, man, I've earned this. I have something to teach these kids?
John, it feels like you're peering into my soul right now. Uh, no, I mean, look, I was a kid from rural Iowa who felt he had no business being at a place like Cornell in Ithaca. When I got to Harvard, I mean, I remember when my very first faculty job, my very first faculty interview, sorry, was at Princeton in my fourth year of graduate school. I was a very nervous public speaker. I'm not anymore, as I practiced a lot. I lost 20 pounds in the lead up to that interview at Princeton because I was so nervous. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I was a former college football player, so I had plenty of weight to lose by that point. So don't feel too bad for me. But no, I mean, the notion that I would belong at Princeton speaking in front of, Danny Kahneman was in the front row, an eventual Nobel Prize winner who I came to be friends with. I mean, that was preposterous.
Yeah.
And I remember the night before I gave that job interview, I was laying in my hotel in the bed, just a nervous wreck. And I got a phone call out of the blue from a fellow grad student at the time, Justin Kruger, who's was a year ahead of me in graduate school. And he had called home to talk to my wife just to find out how I was doing. And my wife told him not very well. Give him a call. And he called me up, and it felt like somebody throwing me a life raft while I was kind of floating there, gave me confidence. I will never forget that call from Justin. I talked to him just yesterday on my train ride home, for instance, and I will never forget that act of kindness. It had such a powerful effect on me. When I was at Harvard, certainly didn't feel like I belonged there, but I did my best. And kind of everybody is feeling that way in some
Yeah.
ways when you're in these places that you think of as elite. I now feel more comfortable, but it takes a while. It takes a while till you realize kind of everybody's in the same boat. We're here together.
We could spend an awful lot of time talking about your past, talking about your first book. I want to spend the majority of our conversation talking about your most recent book.
Great.
It came out just a couple days ago.
Yep.
So, first things first, a busy professor doing a million things with your own family. Why invest the time to write a book in a marketplace that's already got a lot of books?
I think our research is important. And I got to a point where I felt like I have a story to tell. I think people ought to be connected to the sciences, to the research that we are actually doing. There are ways, I think, to gain wisdom faster, more precisely, to teach us things we didn't know before than we get from by learning from experience, which can sometimes just confirm the beliefs we already have, whether they're right or not.
Wow.
Science, I think, is the way we make progress on understanding and living as better people. And there's too often a disconnect between the kind of research that we do, the papers that I write. Nobody reads the papers that I write. Even academics do not, as much as I would like, read the papers that I would like, as I would like. And so, for people to really learn about our research, particularly outside of academia, for research that I think changes how people would live their lives because our research has changed certainly how I live my life, I just thought I had a story to tell and I wanted people to know of it. I'd done it once before. I thought I could do it again. And I knew I would regret it if I didn't tell the story about our research and what we were learning and how it's impacted me and other people, so many other people I've talked to in the course of writing this.
It's a slow boil when you roll out a book, and sometimes it takes a while for folks to open that thing up and get into
Yeah.
page one and
Yeah.
five and onward from there. But for the folks who've already read it or they're currently reading it, what are you hearing already from the readers?
So some things I hear from people are that they have started new things and found it to be surprisingly rewarding. So, the thing that the book will lead with that I think most people will take from it right away is that we underestimate how positively others will respond when we reach out to connect with them. And the most kind of memorable set of examples I give are talking to strangers, right? And that turns out to just be far more enriching than people imagine. There's this very easy thing that we can do to feel that there's just a big divide between us and them,
Hmm.
right? We've got us, like our friends, the people I kind of know that I've talked to. And then there's them out there, strangers we don't know, academics we don't know, right? Who feel very different, people who think differently than we do
Yeah.
about something, them, right? And we don't really know what them are like. We imagine them, right? But those people, those strangers, are somebody else's kid and somebody else's husband or wife and somebody else's mom or dad. As Bill Nye, famous science guy, once said, Everybody you ever meet knows something you don't. Everybody's got an interesting story to tell you. And by not reaching out and engaging with other people, we never learn that. And it makes us feel overly afraid of other people,
Mm,
overly fearful of others, underestimating the power that we have to lift other people up and connect with other people. And when people read through the book and they try some of these things, right? They take note of those pessimistic beliefs that are holding them back too often and they actually go out there and test them.
yeah.
They tend to be surprised and they'll write back, "You'll never guess this conversation I had in a cab or on the
Yeah.
sidewalk or with my neighbor who I hadn't talked to or in the grocery store," once they tried. And it's empowering. It's empowering for people.
So you and I spent some time together before this conversation that we're recording, and I read your book. I'm already pretty out there. I'm an introvert
Right.
actually, but one to one, I make myself an interviewer, and I
Yeah.
just get to know the people next to me, whether it's on a plane or in
Yeah.
a cab or Uber, whatever it is. And I'm already doing that. But since reading your book, even more intentional. And man, these conversations are they're incredible. Like the gentleman who drove me from the airport last night from St. Thomas came over here with his four brothers and hearing this man's story. And then we ultimately talked about fish and the best way to prepare fish and when do you go fishing and how do you prepare it? And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
had a phenomenal conversation about family, faith, hardship, and fish. Then this morning, my car wasn't at my home, so I had to take an Uber into the office for this conversation. And this gentleman and I talked about our different faiths. He believes
Oh,
something that I don't, but we
yeah.
agree that wow, that's beautiful. Then I talked a little bit about mine. He talked about when he starts driving in the morning and why at that hour, why not this other hour. And at the end of it, he said, "John, just thanks for talking with me, man."
Yeah.
So your book has already shaped the conversations and the depth of conversations that I'm having with strangers in the marketplace. So
Mm,
my first question around this
mm.
is, you talked in the book about a fundamental paradox
Yep.
that we're wired for connection and we intentionally avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. Why
All
would
too
we be
often choose
wired for
not to.
something that we avoid?
Yeah, yeah. So it struck me one morning, as a researcher, as a scientist, you're studying things carefully for a living, but we live in the world that we study. I'm a social psychologist. I study the world out there that you and I and that we all live in. And we are all social psychologists in our daily lives. We think about why other people do what they do and why they act as they act and why we're doing what we're doing. But as a researcher, sometimes you can stop and pause and look at something really precisely that you might otherwise miss. And that was the paradox that you were describing that hit me one morning on a train on my way into Chicago. I was writing a chapter from my first book, Mindwise, describing how we've got this brain uniquely equipped for connecting with the minds of other people, how we're made happier and healthier. We even live longer the more consistently connected we are to other people. Loneliness turns out to be a significant psychological stressor that compromises our well-being, our health, and the longevity of our life as a result. And yet here I was on this train coming in, which I've been doing for years, right? Kind of mindlessly, not thinking much about it. I'm on this train and we got a whole carload of friendly Chicago South Siders all riding in together, made happier and healthier by connecting with each other. And yet then here we all were ignoring each other,
Yeah.
right? And I had someone sit down next to me on that morning. This was a morning that changed my life, changed the way I did my research, changed the way I approach other people because of the research that we subsequently did. And a woman sit down next to me, African American woman, 15 or so years older than me, professionally dressed for work, wearing this awesome red hat this particular morning. And I decided I would try something different. I try to do what you did with your Uber driver this morning, right? Just have a conversation with her. Just try to get to know her a little bit. And, my mind starts screaming at me all the reasons why this would be a bad idea, right? You're going to seem like a creep to her, trying to hit on her or something, right? She probably doesn't want to talk to you. Otherwise, she'd already be talking to you. You probably don't have anything in common with her to even talk about. You don't even have an opening line to talk
Right.
about. And so my brain was screaming at me to stop. And I decided not to and to just say hi to her. Hi, my name's Nick, right? Those are the most powerful words you have in your repertoire that we use too little. Hi, my name is so and so. I love your hat. I got one just like it. And she turned to me with a laugh. Not the best opening line, but the conversation then just started flowing much easier than I expected. And when we got up to leave, I was struck by not just that that conversation went well, right? We've all had conversation with people, they go in differing ways, whatever. What I was struck by, though, was the contrast between my beliefs beforehand about how this might go and how it actually went.
Mm.
Right? It wasn't just good, it was surprisingly good. And that's a contrast that as a psychologist that I recognize is super important because we don't live our lives based on our experiences. We live our lives based on our expectations,
That's
our
so good.
beliefs about what our
Do
experiences
me a
will.
favor, say that again because people listen to podcasts and they're doing dishes, they're working out, they're typing an email, whatever they're doing, and they'll miss that. So tell me again how we think people live our lives and how, in fact, we do.
Yeah. We don't live our lives based on our experiences. We live our lives based on our expectations, our beliefs about our experiences, because those beliefs, those expectations drive the choices we make and therefore the experiences we have. So if you thought talking to your Uber driver this morning would be unpleasant, they believe something you don't, right?
Yeah.
You would not have had that conversation and you wouldn't have found out that you were wrong. That in fact, you probably had more in conversation with this fellow human being than you'd have guessed. That you
Yeah.
can have a perfectly reasonable conversation, regardless of whatever, you might agree or disagree about. And that interaction would lift up that 30 minutes and make it better than it might otherwise be. You wouldn't have that conversation and you wouldn't have found out that your beliefs were wrong. And what we find over and over again is that that experience that I had on my train that morning, that experience that you had in the Uber this morning is not unique to us. We went back to our trains, ran experiments where we had people predict how they'd feel on the trains if they kept to themselves or talked to a stranger like I did that morning. And they believed talking to a stranger would be kind of unpleasant, that they wouldn't enjoy it as much as keeping to themselves. And if you believe that, of course, you'd end up with a train that I see every single morning. Highly social creatures keeping to themselves because they think that'll be better.
Yeah.
But when we put people in an actual experiment and look not just at their beliefs, how they thought they would feel, but their actual experiences, when we put them in those different situations, randomly assigned them to keep to themselves or to talk to a stranger who sat next to them, we found precisely the opposite. That people actually reported a more pleasant experience when they talked to the person who sat next to them than when they kept to themselves. But again, notice you don't live your life by those experiences. If you don't have them, you live them by your expectations. And we just find over and over again that people are holding themselves back too much. Not because they misunderstand how much they'll enjoy being connected with another person, but because they underestimate how positively other people will respond when you reach out to connect to them first.
So you're a researcher. Not only what I love about your work is you're very human. And we'll talk as we go through your life story. I think folks are going to be surprised by some of the chapters in your life story.
Yeah,
But then that life story that you're leading leads then you to be more interested in something, and then you do research around it. So then you bring to bear science.
yeah.
So you have all these subjects that you have on these trains. Now, what did the folks that you had reach out and talk to the person, the stranger, a horrible thing? What did they expect would happen in those conversations? What was in
The,
their mind?
the big thing they thought would happen is that they'd be rejected. That was the number one thing. They believed that the person sitting next to them didn't want to talk to them. And as a result, thought it would be impolite, right? So I think a lot of this looks like good manners, right? I don't want to intrude on somebody's time. They don't want to talk to me. And so it would go poorly or it would be impolite to try to engage them. And so we ignore each other, right? We ignore the stranger or the other or the person who's different from us. That may not actually be kind in the long run, but in
Right.
the moment, that's what people were thinking. And it turned out they were just wrong about that. So people on the trains in Chicago, for instance, thought that only about 45% of people on average would be willing to talk to them if they tried. Turns out the actual number, as far as we can tell, is closer to 100%. We actually, in our original experiments, we never had anybody send a survey back to us saying that they tried to talk to somebody and they gave them the middle finger, right? Or that, they refused to talk to them. Now, it certainly sometimes happens that you talk to people and they're not up for it. They won't talk back to you as much as you might. That certainly happens. It's just far less common than people imagine it to be. But notice, if you think this person doesn't want to talk to you, you won't try. You won't invite them into a conversation with you, and you won't find
Right.
out that you could be wrong, right? You won't find out you could be wrong. So that was the big barrier. They thought they'd be rejected, and they were just off about that.
in your own mind, because I'm sure you have been rejected. I'm the kind of guy, sometimes I run an experiment where I walk through airports and I say good morning to people, and then I track how long it takes until I hear a good morning back.
Yeah.
And the highest I ever got was 11. That means 10 consecutive good mornings before you hear
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So rejection's part of life, but
It is.
wh why do you think that keeps us from moving forward then? Like the idea of being rejected so cruelly that
Yeah.
someone simply doesn't respond. Why does that derail our joy?
Well, so people think it would be more unpleasant than not being rejected, right? And so, I mean, I think that's pretty clear that we get two things wrong. We get the rates wrong. So we get the rates of rejection off. In London, when we ran our train experiments, people thought only 25% of people would be willing to talk with them. Again, it's closer as far as we can tell. It's closer to 100%. Uh, there's a guy I talked to as part of writing this book. Jia Jiang is his name. He wrote a book called Rejection Proof, where he was afraid of being rejected. He was an aspiring entrepreneur, but was afraid of being rejected when he would reach out and pitch people. He decided he needed to expose himself to rejection so that he would develop the thick skin that he needed to go out and actually do this. And so he decided he was going to run this experiment on himself to be rejected 100 days in a row. So he reached out and he asked people, not just good mornings, but he asked people for what he thought were outlandish requests. Asked a security guard at a bank if he could borrow $100 from him, or went into a Krispy Kreme donut store and asked if he could have a set of donuts made in the shape of the Olympic rings. He thought he'd be rejected every day for 100 days in a row. That was his goal, right? These crazy, outlandish requests. When we actually analyzed the videos that he had posted of this, which you can find on his website at rejectiontherapy.com, he was actually accepted more often than he was rejected. He didn't even know that when I talked to him.
Hmm.
He was accepted a majority of the time. And he also thought when people rejected him, it would be harsh, right? Like the person who doesn't say good morning to you thought maybe would be particularly painful. Or the person who says, no, I can't let you borrow $100 would be unkind about it. And he just found that not to be true. That
Right.
even when people couldn't do the crazy thing he was asking them to do, they were kind about it, surprisingly kind, right? We found that in his videos too. And that's a result we see in our research as well, that people are just, not only do they get the rates of rejection wrong, but they also think they will be nastier when they're rejected than they actually do, and that it'll hurt more than it actually does. People are kinder than we think, and we get along better than we might imagine.
One more question on the train, and then I'm going to go a little bit deeper in what
Yeah,
it means for us as individuals who don't typically ride on trains or
yeah,
planes
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
automobiles. So I've heard you say, I can't remember if it's in the book, I think it was on a different podcast, where you were speaking to someone who is part of the metro system in Chicago,
Yeah,
and you were sharing some of the research.
yeah,
Talk about that
yeah,
conversation where Chicago is now thinking they're taking their trains, because what you are proving that turning to a stranger and saying, I like your hat is beneficial to both parties.
yeah. This was when I was running those original experiments. So this was probably 15 years ago now, back in 2012 or so, somewhere in that ballpark. And I reached out, I was in contact with the Metra train people, right? So the folks who run the train. That's our commuter train service here in Chicago. I was talking with the head of marketing because we needed permission to run these experiments on the train line so that our folks wouldn't get arrested for trespassing for doing this, of course. And Virginia Chandler was her name. She was a lovely person to talk to. She retired not too long after we were running this research. And I called Virginia up to tell her about the results of our experiment. And she told me, that's great, Nick. I totally believe your results. I get that in my own experience. The most enjoyable train rides that I'm ever on are the ones where I have a conversation with somebody I didn't know before. But you're not going to believe what we're about to do. I said, Virginia, what are you about to do? And she said, we're about to roll out this new policy called the quiet car, right? And the quiet car is one car on every line of trains where talking is forbidden. Just has to be perfectly silent. Now, look, I understand that listening to cell phone conversations can be annoying, right? And
Oh.
and some, there are times where you just need to kind of decompress. And maybe that's where people are doing their meditation or whatever, and they want some focus time. But I asked her, Virginia, why are you doing that? And she said, well, because we asked people what they wanted on our surveys, and they said that this is what we wanted, quiet time. And I said, if we had asked the folks on our trains, that's what they would have said they wanted too. But if anything, they might have been wrong about that. And I asked her, have you ever experimented with anything else? Have you ever like had a chatty car where people just to get together to talk to each other, right? Just to visit, hang out with friends, whatever that they made on the trains. And she said, we never had a chatty car, but we did have something that was similar to that. We used to have these bar cars. And the bar cars were usually the last car on the line. And they had them coming in from the far northwest suburbs, so Rockford, and way out there in the northwest suburbs of
Uh-huh.
Chicago. And she said, "But we don't have them anymore." I said, "Why don't you have them anymore?" She said, "Because they were a safety issue." And I'm imagining people, stumbling drunk off the train or whatever, and getting into their cars and driving, and that being a problem. And she said, "No, no, that wasn't the problem. The problem was the cars were too crowded." Oh, the too crowded. They were a problem because they were too popular. And I remember thinking at the time, all right, this is the point at which I cannot be a missionary for our field, right? Like you show people the data, and yet nevertheless they might choose something else.
Yeah.
But I think that reflects, I mean, she told me people would become friends for decades on these trains driving into Chicago. They would spend more time with their train friends than they would sometimes with their families because the commutes were so long and their work days were so long. They would meet their spouses on the
Yeah.
trains. I've now ridden on the train for 20 years, and I have a regular commute with a very good friend on the train who I mostly see on the train, right? The trains are unique in their own way. Our research isn't about trains in particular. Our trains are about the power of connecting. But even when you see it with your own eyes, sometimes as the Metro folks did, people they still might choose to do something else.
Hmm. Something else that I found interesting from your work is that it's not just about trains or planes
No,
or Ubers.
right, right, right.
You mentioned that we also are reserved in going deeper in relationships with our friends. So
Yeah,
it's not just complimenting the red hat.
right.
It's saying, John, your father passed away a year ago this month. Like, how are you really doing? So
Yeah.
why are we so hesitant to go deeper with people that we already like and love?
Yeah, so that experiment on the train that we did was just the tip of a massive iceberg of results we saw over and over and over again across so many different contexts because that decision to talk to a stranger, to reach out and connect with a stranger, has a kernel of a choice, of a decision that we make over and over and over and over again in our lives in so many different ways. Social connection, after all, isn't something that just happens to you, it's a choice. It's a choice you make to reach out and engage with somebody in some way or hold back and avoid that engagement. And that choice crops up in so many different places. Once you're talking, you have to decide, well, what do we talk about?
Yeah.
Right? Do I really talk about you? Do I really talk about meaningful stuff? Do I really try to get to know you or not? Find out how you're actually feeling on the inside about something, whether it's a joy or a pain, right? Or do I, hey, how's work going today? Or, how was your weekend? Right? Stick to things that are kind of outside of your heart or your mind and are in the world out there. And it's the same barrier as talking to a stranger we find, which is people think others don't want to go there, that they don't want to have that conversation with them. It's the very same kind of phenomena that people think that they're more interested in what they have to say than the person they're talking to will be, or that in the case of losing your father, say a pain, right? We lost a child July 11th, 2016, 6 months into my wife's pregnancy, who had Down syndrome. People avoided us after that in
Yeah.
some ways, compounding the pain of that because they didn't know what to say to us. Not because they didn't care, not because your friends don't want to know how you're feeling after your dad died, but because they worry it'll be impolite that you don't really want to go
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Right. And so they don't ask. And what we find in our research, again, is that we're just off about that people underestimate how much they will enjoy, how meaningful a connection they will have, how much they'll have in common with someone when they choose to go deeper in conversation than they might otherwise. Deep conversations are the ones that really connect us with other people. But because we underestimate how positively others will respond to us, too often we hold back from asking people stuff like, hey, how are you doing, John?
Hmm.
And really mean it. right? The kinds of things that actually pull us together.
So if I asked you how the Sox are doing right now in the standings, or the Cubs, or the weather, the traffic in Chicago, that's not necessarily going to deepen our relationship. Will you share with me one question that will?
What's your story? That's one I love to ask people. So, I'll get into in any conversation with a stranger, wherever it might be, if I've got a little time. What's your story? And what it's clear when I ask that, and you sometimes I'll follow that up with, just tell me a little bit about how you got here. Now, John, if people ask you that, they better have a week to sit with you, right? Right. So there's going to be an unbelievable conversation that's going to result from that if people don't already know your story. But that's one that gets really to something that matters for people. Tell me about your life, right? How'd you get here? And
Hmm.
people understand when you ask them that question that you're not asking about, oh, I drove here on, the Dan Ryan. They
Yeah.
get that they're asking you to tell me, who are you? Right? Who are you? And everybody's got an interesting story to tell you. David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times, who I've gotten to know over the years a little bit because he knows about our work, is connected to the University of Chicago. After hearing about our work, just started talking to strangers a little bit more, going a little deeper in conversation than he might. This is one he likes to do. He once, in conversation with me, and he said this to other people as well, he'll say, how often have I started a conversation like that with somebody and they've said, it's none of your damn business? And the answer is never, right? Like, never. 0 times does that happen with somebody. And you'll sometimes be shocked by what you learn. Just a little over a week ago, I was in Los Angeles, had an Uber ride to go in to do an interview. It was a 23-minute ride. And I know that because it was on the receipt. I get into the cab. The man is clearly Iranian. Like an older gentleman, kind of gruff looking, like a tough, you know, stern kind of fellow. Okay. And we sit down and I ask him, would you mind if I asked you how you feel about the war in Iran right now?
Yeah.
It was clear that I meant it, right? And he started kind of brushing it off a little bit, saying, I do not have any good feelings for the regime in Iran. And then he started telling me the story about this because I was listening and I would ask follow-up questions because I was taking an interest in it. And he told me that his son had died in a protest in Iran, shot in the neck, 15 years old, and died. That he was in Doha at the time running a business that was very successful. He went back to get his son's body. He was told by everyone not to do this. He was arrested at the airport, put in prison for 6 years, never did get his son's body back, had to sell everything he had to pay ransom to the Iranian government, fled seeking asylum to the US. Finally, after 3 or 4 tries, got his asylum granted in the US on the day that his wife died after being in a long coma in the hospital.
Oh,
23 minutes, John. I was in this Uber ride with this man. We were both in tears at the end, hugging in the backside of his car, right? Now, it's easy to imagine, it would have been easy to imagine that this stern guy didn't really want to talk to me that day. And it's possible he didn't. It's possible he didn't, right? And our data do not suggest that you should be intruding into everybody's lives,
that's
right?
right.
That you should be pushing them in to do things they don't want to do. Our data suggests that you get the likelihood that having an interaction with a stranger or reaching out to have a deeper conversation or expressing your gratitude or asking for help when you need it or being open and honest in your relationship, you underestimate how positively those interactions will go. And what they suggest, I think, is being more open, not to demanding interactions from other people, but inviting them into one. And that's what I did with the guy on the train, was just tested that belief, that red flag that was going on in my mind that said, he doesn't want to talk with you. He doesn't want to go there to talk
Yeah.
about that hard thing in his life that, of course, we're all thinking about all the time. When we lost our baby, we were thinking about that all the time. You think about your life story all the time. He was thinking about losing his son all the time. We think they might not want to go there. When you check that red flag that's holding you back, you just test it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find that red flag that's holding you back is wrong. And that's where the opportunity for growth in our lives, for learning new things, for living our lives a little bit different, that I see in our research over and over again, people getting those red flags wrong, that's where I think those opportunity for living a little bit better comes from in our work. And I've seen it over and over again in my own life as well.
Man, there's so much there. If you hear nothing else from that conversation, the boldness of just asking people how they are, what's their story, and caring enough to listen.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure, like, well, what's my follow-up question when he tells me he's from Iran? And tell me more about that. This isn't
Yeah.
this isn't rocket science. Just
Yes.
end sentences with question marks and see where it goes. So
That's a
let me
good
do that
one.
one more time to you. You talked about almost 10 years ago now losing your baby, which closed a door mightily, and yet in time opened up another door to little Lindsay.
Hmm.
Talk about Lindsay, talk about her life, and
Yeah.
talk about how she has shaped your perspective on relationships.
Yeah, so our daughter that we lost, we had named Sophie. We lost our daughter 6 months into my wife's pregnancy. At 3 months, we did the standard amniocentesis and learned that our daughter Sophie had Down syndrome. This was not something I was prepared for. I don't think any parent really is prepared for that. We had already adopted two children by that time, so we had a family of four by then, two biological children, two adopted from Ethiopia. We were blessed by them, wonderful family. This diagnosis was very unexpected for us, and I didn't quite know how to respond. I had all kinds of pessimism about how this would go, about how raising a child with an intellectual disability would be. We started reaching out to families who were raising these kids. I'm speaking just of my own mind, not of my wife's. My wife has her own thought. I married an angel when I was 21 years old, and Jen is phenomenal human being, married 30 years this year, and so she has her own thoughts about this. But my thoughts, I was nervous about how this would go. We started calling people who were raising kids who had Down syndrome just to find out what it's like. As a psychologist, I know we cannot really know what it's like to be in an experience we are not in. And so
Yeah.
I did what psychologists refer to as surrogation. My colleague Dan Gilbert in the psych department at Harvard refers to as surrogation. I called surrogates, people who were in that situation, having that situation, and asking them what it was like. And to a person, these people felt like they were reading off of a script. They said, describing their child who had Down syndrome as a blessing in their lives. We just heard that over and over again. It gave me some courage. Yeah, we can do this, and we can do this. When we lost our baby at 6 months, it sucked. It was very painful. We were ready to go. We were prepared, and it was very painful. And we sat with that pain for about a year. My wife and I going through very different emotions over this. Um, and about a year afterwards, I went to her one morning. She was sitting in the sunroom, and we were just kind of in a funk. You just, if you've gone through grief as you are now, you're a year out from losing your dad. There can be a funk sometimes that sets in. At least it set in for us. We didn't know how to move forward here. And I went in one morning and I asked Jen, you know, we were ready to have a baby and lost her. We could do this again. We've adopted before. We could do this again. There are still parents who, kids who need parents, and we were ready to have a child. We could do this again. Would you be open to adopting another child? And she turned to me without missing a beat and said, would you be open to adopting a child with Down syndrome?
Mm.
And my mind was not there, was not back in that place. And all the same pessimism that I had, at 3 months when we got the diagnosis came rushing right back to me again. And I thought, ooh, that was not what I was thinking. That's not
Yeah.
where my mind was. But if you're a researcher, if you're a scientist, your mind wanders to your data. It just does. And I had been seeing at that point thousands and thousands of data points of people underestimating how positively it would go if you reached out to connect with someone in this way, pulled them into your lives, how positively they would reach back to you. And I had all those stories in my heads too of other parents who were raising kids with this particular intellectual disability. And I remember so much feeling that it gave me some data-driven courage that I'm probably getting this wrong. This is one of those flags in my mind, one of those red flags telling me not to reach out that is probably off. And when you're married to an angel like I am, with resources like we had a very strong marriage, we had a stable family, I had a good job. I had data-driven courage that we could do this. And so it took me a little bit, but I was on board. And about a year after that, took the family to China to meet our daughter, Lindsay, who was 2 years old, was left abandoned in front of a store when she was just weeks old by a woman we'll never met, whose own story we'll never know, who I'm sure had all kinds of fears
Yeah.
about raising this child that may well have been legitimate in her own life. We don't know. And Lindsay has just been flat out amazing in our lives. Now, to be clear, very hard, right? Raising a child with an intellectual disability is not a joke. It is hard in ways that raising other kids is not necessarily hard in the same way, but it has their own challenges, right? Our adult kids have gone off in directions and had some harder adjustments that Lindsay is just never going to deal with. That's never going to have to deal with in her life. However, she's also just enriched our lives, enriched our view of what humanity can be like, ought to be like, in ways that I just couldn't have imagined beforehand, right? In ways that my pessimistic fears couldn't have imagined. And one simple way is that Lindsay, she doesn't have social fear in the way that many of us do. And so she has no filter on her hello. She is the very embodiment
I
of
know,
what
man.
of what I'm trying to encourage people to do in their lives. She doesn't have that red flag that tells her not to say hello to people. So when I go to the grocery store shopping with her, she is the most fun person to grocery shop with you've ever seen because she walks down the aisle and she says hello to everybody, right? And greets these people, invites them in for just a second, who are going about trying to go down their grocery list, right? They're kind of dead-faced, whatever they're going through in their life, right? They're just trying to get a job done.
Yeah.
And she comes by with a hello, with this huge smile and these big eyes. And it's just like you flip a switch on their backs often. They just often come alive. They don't always hear her, but when they do, they just come alive to her in a way that's super uplifting. She's also, I swear, the most popular kid in her school. Everybody knows Lindsay. Like everybody knows Lindsay. We learned just about a few weeks ago. Lindsay sometimes doesn't want to come in from recess. She loves being outside, right? She loves to climb up to the top in the winter here in Chicago, the top of this big ice pile that's in the parking lot. She won't come down. And the way the class, the third grade class at her elementary school gets her to come in, they all line up, 100 plus of these students, and they all start chanting her name. They all start chanting her name so that she'll come down from this pile of ice. Yeah, it has been a blessing beyond what I could have imagined there.
Today, when I experience something hard, and I know I will, I'm gonna think of Lindsay on top of an ice pile and 108-year-olds cheering her name as she slides
Yeah.
on down and walks into some schoolhouse, man. It's such a beautiful image
Yeah.
that the world would run from. And yet, for those of you who live there, you embrace and you would call a blessing. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I want to thank you for blessing us with that story. And when you're in your hardest moments, when you feel like you're on that ice hill and you don't want to come down, how has being a little more social helped you? Give me like a specific example of
So
how reaching out has helped you come on down and step on up.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that it has given me. So first off, it's not that I live a saccharine life, right? It's not, I don't mean to sound Pollyannish here. Our data don't suggest that hard things won't happen to you and you can recover from them instantly. It's okay to sit with pain at times. It's
Right.
okay to struggle through moments. We all do, right? But it has also suggested ways that even amidst whatever's going on, right? At work, there are challenges. Our kids go through struggles, right? They're a roller coaster ride. um, in the midst of that, one thing that we've learned from research on happiness and well being is that it is driven a lot not by the intensity of the positive experiences you have, but by the frequency of them.
Mm.
And that you can then choose moments. You can choose moments to be a little more social in ways that will lift you up in that moment, turn kind of a dull time into something that's better. And I don't take those moments for granted. So yesterday I bump into Barbara on the train. Barbara works at the hospital here. I've gotten to know her a little bit over the years. Struggling through something at home or with the kids, I can take a moment there to talk with Barbara on the train, and it'll make that moment better. And I take that opportunity. This morning, Ellen, I haven't seen Ellen on the train for a long time. I sat with her for the train ride, which otherwise I would have been doom scrolling on my phone or whatever. I choose that and it makes that 30 minutes better. When I get into the office, I've
Nick,
got a
what kind of, tell the listeners what kind of phone you have. I'm sure it's the iPhone 17.
I do. Yes, I can show it to you right now, right? It's this here's what Lindsay looks like. There's my home screen of Lindsay on it. Yes, I have a standard iPhone, right?
I thought you had a flip phone. I thought you really
So
did
I
have an old
used
school.
to. So here I used to, right?
You set me
So
up on that one, man. I really
I
thought
know
you
it.
were going to hold up my mom's jitterbug, which
Sorry,
I don't know how
John.
to operate because it only makes phone calls.
So for a long stretch I did. I used a dumb phone, but now I travel so much, I gotta get like cars and stuff. And
Crushing.
so I do carry that. But I'll tell you what I do. So I did cave on that. You're right. For so years, I carried a dumb phone, a stupid phone. I went back to this because of traveling.
I get
But
it.
I keep it in my bag, right? So I don't
So,
keep it on me.
final question on the book and for our listeners before we shift into what we call the Live Inspired Seven is you've got listeners who are raising 8 kids, who are busy. You've got widows. You've got folks who are in between jobs. You've got folks who are on top of the mountain and those feeling buried under its weight. What's one thing that we collectively can do, whether we're extroverted or introverted, huge network or no network, to become just a little bit more connected where we are as we are?
So I'm holding up to you now. If you're listening to this, you can't see it. It's a thank you note, right? It's a gratitude letter that I received actually from a student who wrote to me after class was done. I think that's a very easy thing to do is to think about somebody you're grateful to in your life and
Yeah.
reach out and let them know. And in the dark moments, that can be particularly helpful. And that actually doesn't require anybody else's involvement at the time. And so it can be particularly easy when the times are tough and you feel like you're low on energy a little bit. That's a really easy one to do. On any given day,
Mm,
you can shift your attention away from the headwinds that you have, which of course we all have, to some tailwinds that we have that are easy to overlook. So that's one simple recommendation. Just take a minute to think about somebody you're grateful to. You can just reflect on it. You don't have to write him a note, but if you have a moment to just jot him a little note or send him a text or shoot off an email saying, I'm having a tough day today, but I'm thinking about how much of a blessing you are to me, and I'm super grateful for you. Thank you. That helps in those. That takes a moment and makes it a little bit better. So that's one. And that also builds connection
mm.
to another person. That's a challenge I would give to anybody who's listening to this right now, who's feeling a lot of headwinds, is to try to find someone who's a tailwind in their life, who's a blessing to them, and to let them know about it. One person for me, I actually have their note on my desk right here, just by coincidence, because I'm going to send him a copy of my book, is my high school band teacher, Craig Awney, high school band teacher from Cedar Rapids Prairie High School in Iowa, who for years I had felt grateful to and who I would try to channel when I go into my classroom. But for years, it felt awkward and weird to reach out to tell him that. And so I didn't. And that's sort of interesting. We all have folks we feel grateful to in our lives, but who we haven't reached out to express it to. Take that, take that opportunity and use it, right? Take it and use
So I lied. I told you that was the final question. I do have one more.
it.
Feelings are notoriously wrong. We live our life kind of in our feelings.
Yeah.
And right now, I'm sure many people are feeling like, well, they don't want to be a little bit more extroverted. They don't want to
Yep.
compliment the hat on the lady
Yep.
next to them or
Yep.
send a note to the old band teacher.
Yep.
Give us some, succinctly, some specific benefits in our life on what happens when we're just a little more social, when we're a
Yeah.
little bit more out there socially.
Yeah, three things I think. One, makes you feel better in the moment, and those moments matter. A good day is one where you string along some good moments. A good week is full of a string of good days. A good month is a string of good months, right? Or good weeks. A good life is a string of those good moments. Don't underestimate those. Makes your moments better. Second, it makes other people's moments better, right? It's not just that you have a positive impact on yourself. These aren't purely selfish actions. Sociality connects us with others in positive ways and makes their lives better too. So that's a big positive impact. Third, it's going to change the way you view humanity, I think. When
Hmm.
you test those flags and you reach out to connect a little more often. Jia Jiang, the guy who was worried about rejection, right? He overcame his fear of being rejected because he learned that other people are kinder than he thought they would be. And when you do that, you walk around in a world that just feels better than the one you might otherwise mistakenly fear, right? It just makes other people seem less strange to you, less otherish, and it kind of lifts you up in lots of ways. And I can't think of any better benefits in life than those three things.
Well, Nick, we wrap up our conversations with our friends with 7 questions. They're called the Live Inspired Seven. Just quick questions, quick answers. Here we go. Question number one, besides your own, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Tom Gilovich's book, How We Know What Isn't So, it got me into a PhD program with his an advisor as an advisor, changed my life.
What's one positive characteristic or one beautiful trait that you possessed as a little boy growing up in Iowa, wishing
Sure.
you had more of today?
Time. That's not a that's a characteristic. Time, right? Time to savor. I had more time then. Um,
Awesome.
that's what I would say. Yeah, succinctly, I would say that.
If your home caught fire and all living things, children, spouses, everybody's out, man. You have an opportunity, though, of running back in and grabbing one thing that matters to you. What would you grab?
Our wedding album. That's what I would grab.
If you could sit on a bench and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
I guess Jesus Christ. I have some questions.
Don't we all? What's the best advice Jesus or anyone else ever gave you? So, the best advice you've ever received is,
Let me give you one related to my work world, which came from Dan Wegner, who was a psychologist and an early mentor of mine. He said, our jobs as an academic are great because they allow us to do so many things, and you should try everything once. And that has led me to be curious
yeah.
in my job and in my profession and my willingness to say yes to things that I never would have done before. And it opens you up when you're willing to try things,
Hmm.
including in our research, right? Try reaching out, try connecting, try things. That's when you learn.
What would you, if you could give your 20-year-old version some great advice, what would you whisper in his ear? So, if you could go back 33-ish years and offer some wisdom, what would you say to him?
You can learn to do it. That is just that I was so insecure as a young person, because it is easy to look at other people and where they are and to assume that they have always been that way.
Right.
Most of the things that come to us come through luck, good fortune, right? So there's a lot of that, but also through working a lot, right? I looked at my PhD advisor and I thought I could never do that. I could never speak like that. I could never communicate like that. And what I hadn't seen are the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours that he had put into that to become the person that he was.
Hmm.
And there is so much you can learn to do if you try. And that includes simple things like reaching out and connecting with people more often, if you try and you're open to learning. We are not fixed creatures that are a type of person. We are highly flexible, malleable, adaptive people who can learn to do things when we really try to do it. And that's what I wish I knew more when I was younger.
You've almost run the gauntlet. We're down to one final question. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. Nicholas Epley, how would you like yours to read?
He was a good man. I teach a course called Designing a Good Life, where the word good means multiple things, right? Means multiple things. And I mean, who else, what are any of us trying to do, right? Than to live in a way that we would be proud of when we passed on. And I think of good in multiple ways, curious good as a researcher, as a scientist, good at home in my family and in my relationships, good, decent to other people. I don't always fit that, of course. I don't know.
Right.
We all have our failings and shortcomings, but I think that's what I would hope.
Well, my friends, he showed up as a professor, as a researcher, as a scientist, as a best-selling author, as a whole lot of other jobs in academia. He showed up as Professor Nicholas Epley. He leaves Nick. And Nick, I want to thank you for being my friend, for doing the work that you're doing, and for teaching the rest of us that you don't need to be a researcher or a scientist to love the one in front of you. And that changes not only their life, but yours. It's a great example, and I appreciate you teaching it.
Thank you so much, John. I'm
My,
delighted. I'm blessed to have been invited today.
my friends, that is the voice and the story of my friend Nick Epley. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live with your soul on fire.
Well, my friends, one of my biggest takeaways today from the conversation with Nick Epley was this. The connection we're looking for is often just one small act of courage away, whether it's starting the conversation or expressing a little gratitude or simply asking someone, so, what's your story? Nicholas reminds us that people are far more open to connection than we tend to believe. If you enjoyed the conversation today with Nick, I think you're going to love the conversation I had a couple years ago with my buddy, Dr. Mike Rucker. Mike shares how intentionally increasing joyful moments can improve our health, our relationships, and our productivity. But he also provides specific guidance to help you make the most of your time and create more space for having fun. Sounds like a good time to me. You can check it all out at episode 532 or by joining me online right now. Join me there, won't you, at johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. I'll have a link in the show notes. One more time, family, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in to that podcast. I want to thank you for being part of my Live Inspired Together family around here. And I want to remind you that the foundation is firm and that the best is yet to come. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.